Well, good day, leadership participants of InnovATEBIO and the National Center for Biotechnology Education. This is an NSF ATE Center grant, and one of the big programs we have in this particular grant is the Leadership Institute. And I'm delighted today because we're joined by Dr. Beth Malcolm, who's the Executive Vice President of Campus Operations and Public Affairs at Austin Community College, and is also the lead for the college on this particular grant. We're also joined by Dr. Linnea Fletcher, who is the Principal Investigator for InnovATEBIO, and joined with me as well as Dr. Tom Tubon from Madison College. And I want to just welcome you all.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Hi, everybody.
I'd also like to make a particular note about Sean Killebrew, who's our actually military veteran who had served our country both in Iraq and the Middle East. Sean has a very unique story, and I just want to tell you guys the story very quickly, that he actually came to our college as a vet, took his program in media, and then graduated and then was granted a job with the college. He earned that job. And we think, I think we'll all agree, those of us that are in the community college system, this is just a wonderful story. So Sean, hi.
Hi, Russ. Good to see you again.
And good to see you. Today's topic is on communication and the importance of clear and open and meaningful communication in leadership. And I don't think there's a better person that we could have asked to do this in Dr. Malcolm. So I'm going to start my questions, and the way it's going to go, Dr. Malcolm, is it's going to go a little bit of a round robin here. Tom I'll ask you a few questions. Tom will ask you a few questions, and Dr. Fletcher will close it. Is that good with everybody?
That's fine.
Sounds good.
Dr. Malcolm, tell us a bit about yourself. I believe you were in government prior to joining the community college system.
Well, I was, but I had a long journey with a whole lot of detours, not shortcuts, to get to government even. So I moved first. My first degree was in elementary education in early childhood. So I taught in the public schools, and I've taught K through 6th grades. Then I got my master's degree in counseling, was an elementary school counselor, and then moved to drug-free schools coordinator, and then on from that to a coordinator of high school counseling. And then I also did some private practice as a licensed professional counselor. After that, I did consulting in education. I fell off into the world of politics and literally fell off into that world and worked for a congressman, and then from there ran for and was elected as the state Democratic Party chair in Texas. I'm still the only woman that has ever held that position. After doing that, I went back home and did consulting, did a little lobbying, and was asked to run for the college board of the community college, Texarkana College. And I ran for it and beat an 18-year incumbent and literally fell in love with the mission of the community college. Community colleges are the people's college. They're the way for anybody and everybody to get that leg up and go to college. And, I'm a little biased after having been in community colleges. I think they're the best way for people to start because the classes are smaller. The faculty members are there to make sure you succeed. They're not trying to get you out of class. And so that was a wonderful experience being on the board. And in the midst of being on the board, it was really about the time of the big student success movement, because a lot of times we know students would come to the community college, they'd go in the front door and out the back door. It was a revolving door where they weren't getting the credentials or the degrees or whatever they needed. And so I fell in love with what I saw as the student success movement. And in my 50s said, I'm going back to school to get my doctorate. I want to be a part of this. I did that. I came to the University of Texas and I got my degree in my doctorate degree in educational administration with a specialty in community college leadership. And fortunately for me, when I finished, I was hired at Austin Community College right here in Austin, Texas, and have been here ever since. I started as I started as an intern. I did my internship at ACC with Dr. Rhodes, our chancellor, and then I became special assistant. At that time, he was the president, special assistant to the president, And then I became the Vice President of External Affairs. And now I'm the Executive Vice President of Campus Operations and Public Affairs. So as you can see, I had a long journey to get to where I am, but certainly the government piece of that has been very beneficial in what I do.
Well, thank you for that wonderful resume that you've spoken to us today. Dr. Malcolm, it really is kind of a thesis of mine that your past experiences help you with your everyday decision making. Could you speak to that for our leadership cohort?
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you. Everything I've ever done helped me get to where I am today. And I kind of start with the teaching. Teaching is always a part of anything we do. It's about communicating. Teachers, professors, faculty members know how to communicate, and that's such a critical part of anything we do. The counseling, I use those skills daily. I'm not in private practice, but trust me, you need those counseling skills on a daily basis. Sometimes I forget to use them as much as I should, but they're an important piece of what we're doing too. And then, being in several political positions, I learned particularly, in some of those, looking at limited budgets. I also learned to look at how competing political parties would try to use money either for or against people. And I looked at the negative ways that it could be done. So it taught me you better pay attention to what you're doing with government money, and particularly even like for this program is a government funded program. And what you don't want, you need to always in your mind think about what's that going to look like on the front page of the paper, or now on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever. It's so critical to be sure that we're carefully using government money because it is the taxpayers' money. Just like as a family, we have to look at our budget and what we do. I think it's critical to look at how we're spending our money, and I guess you want to be able to accurately account for every bit that you do, and I think of some examples I've seen that are not good ones. I remember seeing something about a university where a person they had decorated a new office. They had bought the furniture from one of the people that was ultimately over that budget. Was it illegal? No. Was it unethical? Yes. But even worse, it did make the paper, and it made everybody look really, really bad. So I think that we have to be frugal and accountable with our money.
Thank you for those examples. And, I think to these upcoming leaders, this is very, very wise information. So I just want to thank you for revealing that to us. And now
I'm with you. I want to say again, I can't stress that enough. I think that is one of the most important things that we have to remember. And I find sometimes in not just colleges, public schools, people think, oh, it's not my money. I'm not worried about that. Yes, it is. And it is the taxpayers' money. And we have to not look at it that way. And remember, anything that is government funded is open to public records, and anyone can look at it.
Yeah, I think that's tremendous advice. And I know myself personally, I heed that every day. I've also been funded, when I had my own company, and I knew it was other people's money. So I was very, 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 very sensitive to that fact. I'm happy to turn it over to Dr. Tom Tubon from Madison.
Thanks, Russ. Dr. Malcolm, I'm pleased to have you on board. And in the short amount of time that we've had together already, it's pretty clear how well of a communicator you are. Given your extensive background and your career pathway in K-12 education, consulting, your work in politics, communication is an absolutely critical part of being a leader. And I'm hoping that you can shed a little bit of light on that for us and discuss a little bit why communication is such an important skill as part of our leadership and our leadership participants, for our leadership participants. And would you be willing to cite a few examples of good communication practices?
Okay. Well, communication really is the key to everything. And then the other thing you always need to remember is perception is reality. You may be doing the best job, or you think you are, about communicating, But if the perception is something different, that can take over. So certainly perception is reality, and you have to figure out how to get your point across so people understand what you're trying to do, because otherwise you've got really big problems if the perception becomes something that was not what was intended to be communicated. So you need to say things clearly. You don't talk in educational scientific terms unless you're talking to insiders. Don't use that lingo and all of those acronyms, because the common person doesn't know what you mean. And many times you're going to be talking to elected officials, or you're just trying to get community members to understand what you're doing. And so if you have an acronym you're going to use all the time, you need to explain it up front so that people know what it is. Educators are horrible about that. I think scientists are too. I know doctors are. I've seen all kinds of situations where we need to use layman's terms in talking to people. Another thing I always tell people is you need to talk in a cartoon, not in a novel. You figure out how you tell it in the shortest way that you can. And that's when I have such a visual of that. And if you'll think about it and you think about political cartoons you've seen, you can get just as much out of a cartoon as you can out of a long article. And with people's attention spans these days, they're probably not going to read that whole article. Or the other way is, will it fit on a bumper sticker? Bumper stickers, cartoons, because you're trying to sell things, you're trying to communicate what you need to do. So those are important. I think another is don't ever lie. Absolutely don't lie. You cannot ever correct that. And again, as I've already said, if it's taken wrong, you've got to get in there and correct it. And it's much more difficult to do that today than it used to be with all the means of communication that we have. And you really need to be engaging in all of them, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Twitter, whether it's media, whether it's in the written word, it's emails, because there's a different group of people that works with each one of those areas. I'm older, needless to say, when you listen to my history. And so some of those are not the ones I use, but there's plenty of people that are, and more coming behind that. And I think if you're in a crisis, particularly, you've always got to be open and tell the truth. And I think a good example of that is if those of us, I know there's younger people on here too, but if you'll remember the Tylenol crisis. And Tylenol did not cause the problem. Someone was causing the problem, but Tylenol was open and honest about it. They came up with a fix, the safety seal. And now most everything that we have has a safety seal. So because of their honesty and integrity, they just became an even greater company. So I think it's critical. Tell the truth, communicate clearly, communicate early, communicate often. And I think those are all critical things to remember.
Those are great lessons to share, not only with our Leadership Institute participants, but I've certainly, from what I'm hearing, I'm going to do my best to embrace these concepts that you just pointed out as well. Absolutely important for moving forward and to really build into that structure for leadership. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about a topic that's been on our minds, which is a little bit more about the pandemic. And what the pandemic has taught us a lot about is the need for clear, open, and meaningful communication. And what has it? We're kind of pushing that question out there for you to get your perspective on what has it taught you that you wish to share with our participants for Leadership Academy.
Again, there has to be a lot of clear, concise communication on a regular basis. And what I'm seeing, we've been in this now nearly a year, and I think y'all mentioned I'm over the COVID operations for Austin Community College District. So I'm on a lot of calls with regional people, elected officials, healthcare officials, learning what we can. And what I've come more and more to understand, COVID-19 communication has to be an ongoing communication on a regular basis. And if you don't communicate often, you leave a vacuum and people start filling in their own thoughts. And those thoughts sometimes just become, oh, they don't even care about us. They're not telling us anything. And then when you realize that, and we have an opportunity to talk maybe to leaders of organizations in the college or to different groups, and you start explaining all the things that we're involved in and all the ways we are looking at and doing things, people go, oh, we just didn't know that. It is a lot of extra effort. It really is, to have all this extra communication, but it's important. And it's really been an ongoing test of our ability to adapt to the circumstances. And I will say there have been many lessons that have been learned though throughout this. And we have the opportunities. So many good opportunities have come from it too, to change what we're doing in higher ed for the better.
So thank you for the perspective. I think that we're all moving our way through the pandemic, and we can see the importance for communication. And it's an amazing thing to think about the scope of the impact when you talk about your communication. And you're talking about communicating to students, your employers, your peers, and the scope of what we need to embrace to be good communicators and good leaders. I appreciate your input on all of these items. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Fletcher. Dr. Fletcher, it's yours.
Well, thank you so much. And I just want to say, Dr. Malcolm, listening to you is always a pleasure. It really is. And I wanted to share with the audience that I worked very hard to make sure that she was my boss for this grant. Dr. Malcolm and Mike Midgley, because I knew that I know the science, but I knew her leadership was what I really needed to make this center grant work. And once again, you constantly demonstrate that every time I'm in your presence and I get to hear your thoughts. So once again, I really want to thank you again for your leadership.
Well, thank you. And before you go on, I'm going to tell this story because, Dr. Fletcher, you are certainly a leader too. And yes, she did. She came to me and said, I want you, to be one of my supervisors. No, she said, I want you to be my supervisor for this. And I said, well, I called her Linnea. I said, Linnea, I'd love to do that, but I'm not over in the academic part of this college. I'm in public affairs and I'm in campus operations. So I don't think that they're going to look at that too nicely. And she said, no, you need to be the person. I said, then you're going to have to make that happen. I'm not going to go ask for this. And she did. She went to the chancellor and she told him and she made it happen. So yes. Dr. Fletcher knows how to lead.
Well, thank you very much. But let us continue because your insights are probably some of the most valuable that this leadership group can actually get. I feel like we need to do another interview with you, but at this time, would you like to share any more with our participants? Because your insights are extremely valuable.
Sure. And I want to say just a little more about COVID, as I did mention for the end of the last question that it's really, really hard. And we do now see a lot of people hitting what they call the COVID wall because everybody has been doing this and then the vaccine came and everything was going to be okay. And now it's not, and there's new variants. And we just have to keep on going. But we all do have to look at what are the positives in this. And I think it is giving us as educational institutions, higher educational institutions, the opportunity to say, hey, we can change things for the better for our students. As all of you know, there have been people that fought being on a Zoom. Zoom wasn't around particularly, but doing things online. And suddenly when everybody had to do it online, we realized, we can. And we've realized there are students that benefit greatly from this. There's others that we need to do hybrid model in person. And so right now, everybody's having to figure out where is it we need to go. But it certainly moved us ahead in higher education in a very quick manner that, quite frankly, our provost and others had been trying to get people to do for years, and it wasn't working too fast. So I think that's all important. And we just have to have patience. I think patience and perseverance are leadership qualities that you have to have, and you can't ever give up and never give in. Know that we can do this. It's critical to take risk, calculated risk, to try things. And it's really important that we're doing just exactly what you're doing in this institute, looking for and training the next generation of leader. You need to think outside of your comfort zone. And this is one of the most important things I think there is. Policy, what you're working on and trying to set, is not always front and center. In fact, I'd say it really is never front and center because it's involved in a political process. So for the people that care about policy, it's front and center. But for the people that are making the policy, it's in the middle of politics. So politics often takes over. You have to learn how to communicate to those politicians to get where you need to go. And you do that best if you have a relationship with them. If you suddenly are trying to go to your elected officials and ask for their support of something, they don't have any clue who you are, or it's in the middle of legislative session like now, it's really too late. Because let me assure you, when the legislature starts or the Congress starts, most of the time they already know what they're going to vote for and they already know what their stand is. So when we all make trips to the Capitol in Austin or your state or to the United States Capitol, and it's fun and it makes everybody feel good and it's important to do so that they keep seeing you, but that is not how you're going to change policy. So build relationships with your elected officials. You need to do it when they're at home in the summer or whenever it may be. And you need to do it in their district offices or their congressional offices in your state. And you also, though, do need to build relationships with their staff. Because quite frankly, not quite frankly, always the staff are giving guidance to these elected officials on what they're going to be voting on. So relationships with staffers are just as important as having a relationship with those elected officials. But you also then want to believe in what you're doing and then be able to fight for it all the time and sell it. And I think those are all communication issues and important things that we can all do to make a difference. And I'm going to tell you a story with that. Here's how I ended up in politics. I was an elementary school counselor, and I had a fifth grader who showed up at my door one morning and said, back in the day, she said, "Miss Malcolm, I need help." She stated to me that she was being sexually molested by a neighbor, and I told her to go on to class after we visited, and I'll be back with her before the end of the day. And I called, and this is another state, wasn't in Texas, but I called the Department of Human Services and told them what was going on, and they said, "Send her home. We'll have somebody there to help her this afternoon." I did that. The next morning, she was at my door again and told me the same story. "Ms. Malcolm, nobody came." And that was horrifying, as you can imagine. So I tried again, called DHS, was told, that's what it was called at that point, and was told that, oh, they just made a mistake. They go that day. On the third morning, she came back to my office with the same story. I knew I had to do something different. I didn't know what it was going to be. I'd already done what I was supposed to by law, but I had a superintendent who said, "Molly Beth, I trust you. Go do whatever you want. I'm going to tell you, you're not going to be able to fix it. We deal with this all the time." But he said, "You have my permission to go." Ultimately, I had exhausted everything I knew. I tried the police department. Counselors weren't in the circle of confidentiality. I called again, and DHS was Department of Human Services. "Nope, you're not part of the circle of confidentiality." I ended up calling I called my husband and was like, "I don't know what else to do." And he said, "You need to call our state senator." And I said, "I can't. I don't know him." And my husband, Bruce, said, "He's a good person. He will help you." I was really young. I was in my early 30s. I had always voted, but I had never been involved with, I didn't know elected officials. And so I called our senator, and that was back in the 80s. And that was back in the day, you know, chain smoking, hard living legislators. But I went to, he said, and I called him. He said, "Can you come to my office now?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I can." Went over, explained the story to him. He picked up the phone behind the credenza, and I'm not going to repeat the words he said because they weren't very nice, but it amounted to get that child out of that house immediately. Slammed the phone down, turned back to me and said, "How do we fix that?" And I said, "Well, first of all, you have to allow school counselors who have masters in counseling to be a part of the circle of confidentiality so they can talk to the police and to these others. And after I explained, he said, we're going to fix that. We're going to write a law. You may have to come and testify, and we're going to change this. So I said to him, okay. And I helped him, and I did not have to go and testify. The bill passed this was in the state of Arkansas. The bill passed in both the House and the Senate with no dissenting votes and brought school counselors into the circle of confidentiality. And I had one of those aha moments. It's about more than voting. If you want to make a difference, then you have to get involved. And that's when I learned, get to know these elected officials, work with them, particularly when they're not in, the Capitol, wherever they are, and you can change things. So that is all I'd say. It really works if you build relationships and learn how to visit with these people.
Wow. This is why I felt, and see, this is why I wanted you to be my boss, because I knew as a national center, this is what we needed to do. We needed to be able to change policy.
Exactly. And I'm hoping there's going to be some good opportunities with the new administration that's there.
Yes, thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining us today. This has been very, very dynamic and very enlightening. And
inspiring.
Yeah, inspiring, of course. And Dr. Malcolm, thanks so much. And we thank you. Obviously, Tom and I are not at Austin. We're at Madison and Forsyth, respectively. But we feel your impact. And so thank you for being on today. And yes, we'll say that Linnea is a great leader because we're working for her. And we have accomplished a lot with InnovATEBIO in a very short period of time. And I'm sure that when the Leadership Institute convenes in person in 2022, we'll hope that, as being a subject matter expert, that you'll be able to come to Winston and actually see the group and interact with them.
Yeah.
I would love to do that. That'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you all. And thank you, Sean. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Malcolm.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Malcolm. I love working for you.
I love working with you. It's so much fun. Never a dull moment. So.
Yeah.